Right now, the median swing voter is not making their choice based on abstract macroeconomic charts showing inflation cooling or stock markets hitting record highs. They are looking out their windows at the physical reality of their own neighborhoods. Over the next few months, political action committees will spend billions of dollars on federal television ads focused on border security and partisan culture wars. But in the manicured swing state suburbs politicians rely on to win, a different crisis is unfolding. The American homelessness crisis has quietly crept out of downtowns and into residential neighborhoods. There is a staggering disconnect in how money is being spent. While political elites fund national messaging wars, local municipal budgets are hemorrhaging millions, trying to patch a shelter deficit that they cannot fix without more housing. Control of the US Congress in 2026 will not be decided by national rhetoric. The deciding factor is playing out on the streets, driven by how voters react to local housing failures. Historically, homelessness was treated as a strictly urban phenomenon. It was something contained within the borders of downtown commercial districts and managed by big city mayors. In the last 2 years, that geography has undergone a rapid outward expansion. We are witnessing a massive migration of the housing crisis. Encampments and RVs have spilled out of the urban core and directly into the swing state neighborhoods that mathematically dictate the balance of power in Washington. Skyrocketing rents and a catastrophic lack of new housing supply are driving this migration, pushing visible desperation into the suburbs. This map illustrates how the geographic shift forces suburban voters into a defensive posture. They are voting based on the physical reality outside their windows, breaking standard political modeling across these 5 specific states. We begin in Maricopa County, the epicenter of the electoral map. For generations, the promise of Phoenix was simple, abundant space and affordable housing for middle-class families. But an influx of new residents combined with a total failure to build affordable units has turned the region into a high-cost pressure cooker. The dream of the affordable desert suburb is disappearing. This Maricopa County data map highlights the failure. The 2026 count found 9,726 unhoused people on a single night. 47% were completely unsheltered, living on sidewalks in 110-degree heat. Even more stark, an 11% spike in homeless families since 2020. Middle-class parents who could afford a 2-bedroom apartment are being evicted and forced into their vehicles. These parents feel abandoned by both major political parties. Washington offers them debate stage rhetoric, while their daily reality is defined by housing insecurity. The death of the affordable desert suburb is creating a humanitarian disaster that is resetting the priorities of the exact independent voters who recently flipped the state. In Nevada, the housing crisis is colliding with the workforce that keeps the state's economy running. Las Vegas relies on blue-collar service workers who function as a vital engine for voter turnout. Historically, Las Vegas offered a unique economic proposition. Service industry wages could comfortably cover the cost of decent housing. This chart shows exactly where that proposition collapsed. While union wage gains remained steady, corporate landlords drove up rental costs at a pace that has now fully decoupled housing prices from local incomes. The backbone of the Nevada economy is being forced out of their neighborhoods. Tunnel systems and desert outskirts have become the new workforce housing. Nevada recently recorded 10,006 residents experiencing homelessness on a single night, a 15.6% jump over the past decade. Nearly half of these individuals are living in places legally deemed unfit for human habitation. For these voters, the priority has shifted radically. They are no longer voting on traditional labor platforms. They are voting for basic survival. In Georgia, the battle for federal power is fought in the suburban belt ringing Atlanta. But as the housing crisis spreads into these counties, local lawmakers are turning the crisis into an aggressive legislative weapon. Instead of funding shelters or reforming zoning laws, state officials have decided to financially punish the municipalities where unhoused people exist. In May 2026, Governor Brian Kemp signed House Bill 295, known as the Safe Neighborhoods Act. This diagram demonstrates the legal loophole, empowering private property owners to directly sue their local governments. If a city allows encampments to grow or declines to enforce camping bans, it becomes financially liable to every property owner in the area. This fundamentally alters the incentive structure for local leaders. Homelessness is now a massive financial liability for city budgets. Georgia has shifted the burden of a systemic housing failure onto local municipalities, explicitly prioritizing homeowner anxiety over the survival of the unhoused. In the Midwest, the housing crisis collides with lethal winter weather. In Dane County and the suburbs of Milwaukee, the lack of emergency beds makes the housing shortage a matter of life and death every November. These charts show a stark racial disparity. People of color make up 58% of the homeless population in Dane County, despite being only 16% of the general population. This disparity is the result of decades of exclusionary zoning, decades of predatory lending, and zero tenant protections. Because there are simply no homes available, the system has adapted. It has begun relying on the criminal justice system as the housing of last resort. Roughly 13% of all local jail bookings in the county are for people presumed to be experiencing homelessness. Local jails are functioning as de facto taxpayer-funded winter shelters. It is a traumatizing feedback loop that alienates the exact, marginalized voters politicians depend on. The road to the House of Representatives runs through the Philadelphia collar counties. These battlegrounds dictate Pennsylvania's statewide elections, but they are currently buckling under the weight of an eviction crisis. Post-pandemic, every emergency safety net and eviction moratorium has been fully erased. The opioid epidemic, strict suburban zoning laws, and skyrocketing rents have converged, effectively blocking new development and displacing the workforce. This chart shows the mechanical result, an industrial-scale eviction engine. Local suburban courts are now processing eviction filings at pre-pandemic speeds, turning out displacement with zero leniency. The anxiety in these communities is palpable. Renters are terrified of missing a single paycheck, knowing the courts offer them no protection. Working-class voters are being systematically pushed out of their homes and the very political districts that are heavily contested in Washington. While Washington obsesses over debate soundbites and top-line inflation numbers, the reality of the American voter is intensely local. The 2026 elections will not be won by the party with the most eloquent macroeconomic policy. The midterms will be won by the party that understands the anxiety of suburban voters who feel their communities unraveling. It is about the physical reality of the neighborhood, the encampment down the street, the eviction notices, and the sheer visible desperation bleeding into the places where families live. The systemic failure of local housing policy has become a central federal voting issue, moving far beyond the desk of the local mayor. Washington is fighting a national war, but the true battlefield for control of Congress is playing out on the American suburban sidewalk. Solving the systemic housing shortage often takes decades. Hiding the unhoused population to appease voters takes only days. As the 2026 midterms approach, federal policymakers and swing state campaigns are walking away from permanent affordable housing. They are substituting long-term economic solutions with aggressive optics-driven crackdowns. This map shows 5 heavily contested battleground states exposing the crisis's baseline. A rapidly expanding economic shelter deficit colliding with a flatlined housing supply. To restructure housing before Election Day, politicians manipulate 3 specific pressure points: federal law, federal finance, and local zoning. By pulling these levers simultaneously, campaigns guarantee an immediate increase in street-level homelessness while simultaneously mandating its aggressive policing. The legal shift empowering local mayors began just prior to the election cycle, originating at the United States Supreme Court. For years, federal courts maintained a strict baseline for public order. Cities could not legally clear unhoused encampments if they did not have adequate shelter beds available for those displaced. This flowchart illustrates the legal mechanics of the 6-3 decision in Grants Pass v. Johnson. The ruling explicitly detached street enforcement from shelter capacity, removing the Eighth Amendment's protection against cruel and unusual punishment as a barrier to sweeps. The immediate practical output is stark. Local politicians are now legally cleared to use fines and jail time to remove street populations even when local shelter space is at absolute zero. This decision operates as the ultimate legal cover. It transfers the political burden of a massive structural housing failure into a localized, highly feasible law enforcement strategy. While local leaders gain new policing powers, a financial policy pivot is detonating simultaneously inside the Department of Housing and Urban Development. HUD administers the Continuum of Care funding mechanism. For fiscal year 2026, it holds a budget allocation of $4,000 and $40,000. This bar chart breaks down an abrupt alteration to how that money is distributed. By protecting only 60% of existing funding, HUD leaves the remaining 40% in a fully competitive, uncertain block. The mathematical consequence is immediate. The National Alliance to End Homelessness estimates this shift puts between 97,170 Americans currently in permanent housing at immediate risk of returning to the streets. Washington is shifting capital away from structural housing-first models and redirecting it toward temporary service-only transitional programs. By combining these legal and financial levers, HUD's competitive funding shift structurally engineers a new wave of evictions exactly when the Supreme Court has legalized their immediate criminalization. This collision of policies is playing out violently across high-income, moderate suburban collar counties. Local politicians from both parties face severe structural incentives to capture the anxieties of property owners. Building permanent housing takes too long, so campaigns prioritize immediate symptom management to survive the election cycle. The conservative campaign playbook reframes the issue entirely. Rather than addressing economic evictions driven by missed paychecks and skyrocketing rent, they campaign on strict public order enforcement, isolating homelessness as an addiction and mental health issue. The result is a heavy financial pivot toward mandated institutionalization and increased law enforcement funding, a strategy that costs taxpayers millions more than affordable housing construction. Democrats in these same districts face a sharp dilemma. Their progressive base demands long-term, compassionate housing construction, but moderate swing voters demand the forceful, immediate removal of visible encampments. This dynamic exposes the hypocrisy of suburban voters who reliably select Democrats on federal ballots, but mobilize to actively block housing development in their own zip codes. This diagram maps the structural equivalence of the two approaches. On the left, a costly funnel toward public order enforcement and emergency rooms. On the right, regulatory shields deflecting high-density zoning. Blue-leaning suburbs weaponize local environmental reviews and historic preservation laws to intentionally starve the housing supply. Despite opposing political rhetoric, both partisan strategies yield the exact same mathematical failure: artificial inflation of property values and the systemic blockade of structural shelter. This mass eviction creates a hidden variable in the 2026 midterms: the logistical impossibility of casting a ballot while experiencing homelessness. This map highlights stringent voting requirements actively enforced in key battleground states, demanding strict state residency, a fixed mailing address, and valid ID. When 170,000 newly evicted working-class citizens collide with this logistical barrier, they fail the requirements. They are quietly erased from the democratic process. In districts historically decided by razor-thin margins of 10 to 20,000 votes, the mathematical erasure of these specific demographics dictates the outcome of Senate races. When the people most economically devastated are scrubbed from the voter rolls, politicians face zero electoral blowback. Instead, they are incentivized to enact even more punitive enforcement policies. This flowchart visualizes the long-term structural reality of the post-2026 landscape. Federal HUD cuts trigger economic evictions, pushing individuals directly into local zoning blockades. A vulnerable citizen blocked from the housing market inevitably faces a grants pass arrest for street camping. That arrest triggers a voter roll scrub. That disenfranchisement mathematically rewards elected officials, re-incentivizing aggressive sweeps without fear of losing an election. History proves that criminalizing poverty does not reduce homelessness. It simply makes it vastly more expensive, significantly more dangerous, and entirely less visible. The temporary optics of the 2026 midterms are structurally cementing the creation of a permanent criminalized underclass in American suburbs. Under extreme electoral pressure from suburban swing voters, the political system is not failing to solve the housing crisis. It is functioning exactly as it was designed, protecting local property values while treating the working class as disposable collateral damage.